And welcome everyone, as Steve said, welcome to our webinar discussion on mental and emotional wellness in the workplace. We're excited to have you. EBITDA Partners welcomes you, and we'll get started. Thanks.
All right, well, one of our panelists has been having some technical difficulties. I think Xfinity has probably choked off his pipeline to his house, and that's causing him some problems. Rob, I see your name on the screen. I see a microphone X'd out, so I'm assuming that you've been able to join us. So this is the way it is in the world these days. So welcome everybody. Appreciate you joining us this morning. We've got a great program and a great panel in front of us this morning, so I'm going to get right into it. EBITDA Partners, we're a consortium of experts that represent different technical and functional areas that can support businesses, and really we're here to help businesses solve problems and manage change and become more profitable. And so we have representatives from each of the different areas that you see on your screen: marketing, Greg Pomerantz; sales development. We have, I knew that would happen. I would blank on somebody's name as I got to that portion of the piece. Scott Plum, thank you. We've got Courtney representing banking. As I said, Scott Plum with sales, Keith Schoolcraft with IT, Jeff Redmond with law and strategy, and Angie Johnson with risk management, and Adam Hennon with accounting, and myself, human resources. I'll be our moderator today, and so I welcome you to our discussion. So we're pretty excited because we've got a great group of people here. I'm just going to do some real brief introductions, and then we're going to let the panelists talk for a little bit on their perspectives on this topic. But I'll start with Mary. Mary is president and CEO of HealthSource Solutions. She's been in this health and fitness industry for the past 30 years. She spent 18 of those with Park Nicollet HealthSource, and the part of the business, HealthSource Solutions, was spun off several years ago, and she became the president and CEO of that new company that was formed. So she works with businesses on corporate wellness program design and management, and supports corporations in their health and wellness initiatives. Kate Snowise is a consultant and executive coach with Thrive.how. Kate is a trained industrial and organizational psychologist, and you may not have known that is a discipline that is taught at university, but it's a very important field that helps us understand people in the workplace in particular. And she specializes in stress and well-being, and she provides coaching to her clients who are executives and others who are dealing with kind of the ins and outs of work and trying to focus on their mental and emotional well-being. Welcome, Kate. Rob, we may have Rob join us on a speakerphone here in a minute because of our technical challenges, and I'm going to blame Xfinity, but hopefully there's nobody from Xfinity on here. So actually, no, I won't blame Xfinity. Rob is he's currently a consultant. He's in between gigs. He's a corporate wellness program manager from inside organizations, and so he has that frontline experience of really helping organizations execute around wellness programs in the workplace. And so Rob brings a ton of expertise. He generally works out of the HR function within organizations. He's a certified intrinsic coach, and he has also SPHR and SHRM SCP certified, which are credentials that are important in the HR world. And I'm Steve Shadd. I'm your moderator. I represent the Human Resources Chair on EBITDA Partners. And so let's get us into the content of the program. And we'll hear from Mary first. Mary, if you wouldn't mind giving us your perspective on these questions and help us to understand what you see from your years of experience and the expertise that you've gained over that time.
Absolutely. Well, I have been doing this for a long time, and stress is certainly nothing that's new. It's always been around us. I would like to paint a little bit of a picture, though, from the past 12 months, because that really sets us up for being in a whole different place than we have been in the past. You know, when you think about this, we really are approaching the anniversary of COVID lockdowns, right? Where we were scrambling as organizations to figure out what's next, what's happening, what do we do, how do we move forward with this? And then came along the racial unrest and injustice that happened in, this past summer, and this height and intensity around emotions. And now we'll be soon moving into the trial of the police officers for, George Floyd. And this is just a very volatile time for people as we approach this. And then in January, we had this, racial unrest and injustice that happened at our Capitol. And you pile that all together, this country has never been through 3 major events like this in 1 year, in 12 months. And that doesn't even include kind of where employees are at. This whole feeling of, just trying to kind of keep our heads above water, being a parent, being a teacher, being an employee, being a coworker. And this is all being kind of wrapped up, and we're living these not separately, but moment by moment for many people. And Kate can share that. She's at home with children. And, I feel I'm fortunate in this space that my children are older, so that I'm not trying to be a teacher to them, but I am witnessing and supporting my staff going through this same period of their time. So as I look at really what we're going through, and the word unprecedented has been used kind of ad nauseum, and but it really is. And to think about how we're stacking stress upon stress upon stress is really, and stress that we've never lived through in our time, really is just really tough for everyone. From even people that are retired are experiencing this undue stress that we haven't had in the past.
What are some of the things, Mary, that kind of the outcomes of that? So that stress that everybody's experiencing, the layering that you were describing of kind of one serious matter after another, how is that manifesting as you look at what's happening in the companies that you work with?
Yeah, and so I would say in our companies, the way it's really manifesting, when I think about the first 3 months of the shutdown, and where we're heading, and HR professionals, and companies, we're struggling to figure out this whole piece of, what do we do? We're shutting down production. People are trying to work from home. Do they have the resources they need? They're balancing their kids now. And so there was this franticness to the stress. Yeah. And then I kind of look at, okay, well, the next 3 to 6 months, people are kind of like, okay, now what's going to happen? When's the next shoe going to drop? Am I going to have a job? Because really people were going, this isn't going to be over in 3 months, clearly. And then as we moved into that 6-month area, I really felt like the fatigue set in. We are tired. We're done with this. We want this over. And then we kind of got to that 9 to 12 month mark, and burnout is just really high. It's emotions have been running on high. The tolerance for things are becoming low because our emotions have been on high, and we've been stretched to the nth degree. So I look at what companies, the kind of the journeys companies have been through, and they're constant having to reevaluate, reassess, implement, reevaluate, reassess, implement. And it's been exhausting for companies. Mm-hmm.
Good perspective. How about your expert sources? What are you seeing from the folks in your networks that kind of are in the know in this space?
I would have to say that, one is we've been turned to as an expert in this space, although we are not, we work at overall well-being, and obviously emotional, physical, mental well-being is a big picture of what we do. So we have had to respond in new ways as a company in supporting employees. And then when I look at, our industry in general, it's really, how can we lift up resources? How can we connect people? Mental and emotional well-being is it's the hottest topic that I've seen come forth, because people are grasping at a solution.
Yeah, that's great perspective. Let's turn it over to Kate. Kate, what are you seeing in regard to the impacts, and how is it showing up in your work?
I think, Steve, first of all, I will say Xfinity is treating me kindly before we move on. I've got like 2 kids upstairs doing streaming. So like,
me too.
what I would say, when we're looking at the impacts from the pandemic, people, building on what Mary said, people are now in crisis. So what I would say is, from my perspective, stress is a short-term reaction to pressure, and burnout is what we start to see when there is that long-term chronic exposure to stress that isn't adequately managed. And that's what we're seeing in people now, that leads to that fatigue. Little things start feeling like big things, the lack of motivation, all of that is really starting to take hold right now. And so I think that what I am noting is that people really are in crisis, and it's initially it was the anxiety and the unknown that was kind of dominating, and now it is the exhaustion and the overwhelm and just the lack of ability to feel like we can get back on the train and keep going in the way that we were. And I think that needs to be acknowledged in terms of where we're kind of collectively at. And as Mary sort of said, we're a year in. And so the coping resources have, in many ways, our individual coping resources, we've kind of chewed through them, if you like. And where many of us kind of collectively are scraping from the bottom of our barrels now. And I think that really does need to be acknowledged.
How does this dynamic of, there's a bit of a tease in this, as you go through, it's like, okay, so we're seeing some hope, and then it kind of gets yanked away. Your kids are in school and all of a sudden there's an infection and it's shut down again. So how does that contribute to this, as somebody who's kind of out of the psychology field? What effect does that have on people?
I think there's definitely that kind of like emotional backlash, right? Like hope and those kind of positive emotions,
Yeah.
It can help us at a mindset level for a certain period of time. And often when we don't have the emotional or the physical energy, we can kind of lean into those positive emotions to carry us that little bit further. But the danger is that if we're kind of holding on for that light at the end of the tunnel, but we're not taking other steps to kind of regenerate, re-energize, and kind of fill up our well-being, if we're kind of just relying on that hope at the end of the tunnel, then we set ourselves up for kind of a greater fall, which can obviously have huge impacts on our own mental well-being. And when we're talking about organizations, the collective well-being, the team, the wider group. And so it really is, it can be dangerous to live on hope without doing other things to take care of our well-being as well.
Yeah, great perspective. And you brought us into the discussion of organization. And I think as I turn to Rob, in his experience managing programs in corporations, as an HR, practitioner in the field, how you manage this in the organization is really the money question, right? For us, why we're here today. And so, Rob, what are you seeing impact-wise from this pandemic, and also the layering of issues that Mary alluded to earlier? How is this showing up in corporations? What are some of the noteworthy impacts from your perspective? You're on mute.
All right. How's that?
That's perfect.
Excellent. Sorry for joining late. I thought I would just add another layer of stress to something that's already stressful. So kind of an object lesson for everyone.
You look great.
Great. I appreciate that. Yeah, I guess what I've been noticing and what I've experienced personally is that organizations are looking at new and innovative ways to support their employees through this time, and certainly looking past this time as well. Certainly there are a lot of employees that are dealing with the sandwich generation. So they might be caring for elderly parents. They might be trying to assist their children, whether they have special needs or whether they're just dealing with the kind of the forced distance learning. And obviously everybody's dealing with it differently, and everyone's coming at it with different resources and availability of assistance to get through things. And so companies are stepping forward in a lot of ways, and they're trying to figure out what their employees need. And the best way to do that, obviously, is to have really frank and open conversations with people about what they are experiencing and what they need in this moment. And so I think the coolest thing is that this will ultimately lead to, I think, a different work environment in the future. And in some ways, it's going to be very positive. Other ways, I think it's going to take a little bit of time to truly ferret out what the long-term implications are. And we'll talk a little bit about that as we get further down the line. But I think kind of innovation in creation of programs and services is really what I'm seeing from companies right now.
Sure. Well, and I think, what I've seen is companies sometimes underestimate the impact this is having, because people show up and they look like they've always looked, right?
Right.
And but it's like the duck on the water, right? The fins are paddling madly under the surface. And so I think really for me, as I've talked to you and preparing for this panel, how are we really thinking about this at a more granular level in terms of impacts on employees? And I think that's what we want to really focus in on managing. Mm-hmm. So let's take a look at our next set of questions. We're gonna walk through this discussion today, folks, and really looking at different layers of the organization. So we're going to start with individuals, and then we're going to talk a little bit about leaders. Because leaders as individuals are experiencing this pandemic too. And as Mary alluded to, the stress of managing through this time is just another layer of stress that organizations have to deal with. So we'll come back to leaders in a moment. And then finally, we're going to talk about it from an organizational perspective and then a societal perspective. So let's just open it up here for you on how are individuals experiencing work today? And the stresses, we've alluded to some of those already. And how does that play out in terms of satisfaction, productivity, and engagement? Because I think that's the key thing here that our audience is really going to be interested in is, why should I care about this? What's in it for me from a business perspective, if you put it kind of selfishly? But more importantly, it's like, what do I have to be concerned about so that I can help people? So who wants to kick us off on this?
I can jump in.
Thanks.
In terms of how are individuals experiencing work today, I think we're aware of their unique stresses because each of us are experiencing them. Obviously, there's the disconnection, and if people live by themselves, there's loneliness, and there's that feeling, even if we are more introverted, of just not feeling connected. And it's a fundamental human need, no matter how we look at it. And even if we are living in our nuclear little families, that lack of connection to others, I think, is a real stressor. But so is obviously the role conflict. As we mentioned, I have 2 little kids upstairs doing their distance learning at the moment, and that obviously adds additional pressure. As Rob mentioned, that sandwich generation, worrying about elderly parents or still parenting children, just this role conflict of things that used to kind of have boundaries around them naturally that are all kind of blurring into this work-life muddle, as I've heard it referred to. And so we're no longer talking about work-life balance. We're talking about how do we make all of these pieces work. And what does that mean for the organization, and why should you care? It massively, if we have stressed employees, they cannot show up in the same way and work in the same manner. And so, like Steve was saying, even though everything might look fine for that 1-hour conversation you're having on Zoom, everyone can kind of pull it together and look the part. That doesn't mean that everything is okay with that individual. And, research indicates that an employee who is reporting high levels of stress is likely to be 22% less productive. And so you're not gonna, productivity is gonna go down, but also an employee that is reporting feeling stressed or burned out is also 2.6 times more likely to leave. And we have seen that with particularly women dropping out of the workforce since the pandemic. And I think that's a tragedy for women and the role that women play in the workplace. Because of this role conflict, obviously there has been perhaps a lot more of the invisible labor of raising children and other things landing on women. And that is the impact we've seen. They're dropping out of the workplace. So you're going to lose great talent, and you're less likely to have that level of engagement. And then finally, just the productivity level across the board is likely to go down.
Yeah, so there's real costs to this. And I think as this drags on, organizations really have to be attuned to this. Mary, what's your perspective on this, and in terms of how people are experiencing work today? What are you hearing from your clients, and what are you seeing directly? Don't forget to take yourself on mute. That's such a thing these days, isn't it?
It is. It's the new word for our
it is.
this era, right?
Yeah.
You're on mute.
Here, I'm going to do this. If it happens again, I'm going to do that.
Yeah. Okay. Well, you know, I feel like in some respects I have this quality or this interesting perspective in that I own a company and I have 45 staff that report to me. So we're not huge, but it's enough that, and we have people that are dispersed. So we have a lot of people in the field, and we have about 12 people that would normally report to an office. And then we certainly are there to support our clients going through the same thing. So when I think about the individuals, you know, I think, you know, first about my own team, and that we have the type of business that is able to be highly flexible. Yes, we have to certainly continue to support our clients, but when I think about burnout, one of the big things with burnout is there's lack of control of your work schedules. There's lack of control of feeling like you can make a difference. You're kind of marching along, and that increases burnout rates. And sometimes, you know, the industry itself dictates that, and others is just the circumstances we're in. So when I think about our team and the ability to be able to flex their schedules to meet their demands, you know, with small children, and, oh, I got to get my kid on a Zoom, or, you know, on their Zoom call, excuse me 1 second, you know, it's just become an okay place for us. Again, I feel fortunate that we have a business model that can support that. There's a lot of businesses that can't be supported. So
I want to pick up on that idea that Kate brought up earlier about kind of scraping the bottom of the barrel of resources that you have to be able to deal with stress. Are you seeing anything? And I'll open this up to the whole panel if you've got something to add to it. Are you seeing shorter fuses? Are you seeing people maybe disappear for a while and you're kind of wondering, hey, this is unusual, and then they come back? How is it manifesting in terms of like behavior that you might be seeing in the workplace? Have you noticed anything, and are you hearing about this from clients or your own experience?
I would say for us, what we really had to do was step back and put boundaries to say, you know what, it's not okay to be checking emails from 6:30 in the morning till 10:30 at night. Set some boundaries for yourself. There's work time, you know, and then there's obviously the other times. So we felt more like we had to pull people in so they weren't at work 100% of the, or trying to be at work 100% of the time.
Mm-hmm. You know, I read about, Kate, you may mock my interpretation of this, but talked about segmenters and integrators. And if you think about people who kind of put up boundaries around kind of work and life, this situation can be really stressful, right? Because that's now been blended together, and we can help those employees by helping them create more boundaries in their work. Have a separate space, keep your kids away, don't let the cats into the room. So, and then there's the integrators who can never turn it off, right? It's like they can fluidly move from work to life, and the threat for them is it spills out in the entirety of the day, right? And so then you get the emails at 12:30 in the morning. So how do you help the employees who are, you know, really coming from different perspectives, where, you know, in terms of what feels comfortable to them and how do they feel most productive? How do you guide organizations? And again, I'll open up to the panel, but Kate, if you've got anything to add to that in particular, since you brought up that idea earlier.
I was totally going to add something else, Steve. So I might just might be all over the show, but I was just going to mention some of the symptoms of burnout at an individual level and really build on that, you know, that short fuse idea. Mm-hmm. Just for everyone watching, the World Health Organization does have a definition of burnout, and you can go and look it up to look for the signs that you might be seeing in people. And just to give like a high level overview of what some of those signs might be, that someone isn't doing well and might be exhibiting signs of burnout, you're likely to see sort of that cynicism, so lack of belief or hope in the future, maybe that short trigger or fuse or a negative kind of energy around them that isn't typical. Mm-hmm. Also reduced confidence, So people feeling like maybe they're not capable of the things that they're well capable of, but kind of that pushback and like, oh, I don't know if I can do that, is often a sign that people are really starting to get to the bottom of that personal barrel. And also that exhaustion. So just a lack of motivation, maybe some of that social withdrawal as well. So just as a sort of a high level what to look for in individuals, I would say that cynicism, disengagement, reduced confidence, and exhaustion are important things to kind of consider.
Okay. Rob, give us a perspective on that from kind of the corporate environment and how you deal with those things. What do you see?
Yeah, and I guess it would probably vary based on the work model that's currently in place at an organization. Some organizations have essentially been able to work through this without kind of a major change in how they operated, because they need to be on site and they're essential businesses and they were allowed to do so, obviously with major changes in how they operate. So masking protocols and changes in hygiene and increased sanitization and so forth. So there's a lot to layer on there, but the other organizations that have been able to go to a completely virtual work model have basically had all of that social structure, all of that interaction stripped out. And so the things that you might find supportive in a normal environment, and you think about Gallup's research and how important it is to have what they call essentially a best friend at work. All of a sudden that best friend might not be there in the same way that they have previously been there. And so you take out that social support network, and it does kind of turn into a floundering situation where people aren't as effective as they once were. And so I think being mindful of just the nature of change, and generally people need to have certainty and autonomy and the ability to kind of demonstrate competency. And a lot of this is just anxiety, layered on uncertainty, layered on, when is this thing going to end? And so, yeah, you do end up with burnout. You do end up with short fuses. And so it's how can you show up as a leader? How can you show up as a manager to more fully support people who are experiencing those signs and be really in tune with it? And it starts at home too. So it starts with you, and not to use the cliche or the overused cliche, but I'm going to use it. When you think about putting that oxygen mask on, and Mary, I'm sure you've even used this before, but put that oxygen mask on yourself first. And because you will be no good to your team, you will be no good to your family, you will be no good to your employees if you aren't turning inward to figure out what you need in order to work through this on your own.
Rob, that's a perfect segue, and I think that's going to take us into the next topic. Let's home in on leaders, because that this idea that in order for us to be able to care for our teams, we've got to care for ourselves. Oxygen here first. So how do we deal with this? And I think who do we go to, right? I think you talk about it's lonely at the top, employees having a best friend at work. I might have good friends who are in my reporting structure, but they may not necessarily be my best friend, right? And so that social dynamic is a little bit different. And so, this is, it's really strapping on that EQ for leaders. And if you're not naturally attuned to people, and if you're not naturally a carer, a caring type, and having to act that way, that can be yet another layer of stress that comes in for leaders. It's like, how much do I have to really care for people? I just want to get work done, right? And so help us, group. Let's talk about this idea of leaders and how do we help leaders be more successful and deal with their own stress. So yeah, go ahead, Mary.
Let me jump in. Well, as a leader, myself, I think there's a couple key things. One is that turning inside and making sure that you're taking care of yourself, whatever that is for you. Myself, I know what lifts me up and helps me release stress and allows me time to think is just physical activity. So I tend to be a walker, I tend to be a biker, and I get out, and that helps me. But the other thing that I have really found value in is I am now part of 2 CEO roundtables, and to be able to share and just kind of get things off your chest with somebody, you know, when you say it's lonely at the top, you know, I have a phenomenal leadership team. I feel can be very transparent. I can be me with them, very authentic. But yet sometimes going to another leader that's in the same situation you are, and just a sounding board has been invaluable for me as a leader. So that's kind of, that's where coming from is that leaders really need to lean on other leaders that can truly correlate with where you're at.
Yeah. How about this? What about the risk aspect? I mean, what have you found personally as you've maybe found yourself, not necessarily behaving differently, but maybe your mindset has changed, right? And so how does that show up in terms of a risk to your organization? What are the, how does it, are you maybe missing things, or maybe not paying full attention to the things you should be? How does it show up in terms of the risk factors for you?
For me, well, I see, as a leader, I think it's difficult because people want you to be honest and transparent, but yet you have to be optimistic and looking towards the future. You have to, have that glass half full mentality. They want you to show vulnerability, that you're here, that you're in the same place we are, but yet you need to be the #1 cheerleader out there to make sure your team, is moving forward. And I think about, my role, it really has changed in the last year, is how I need to be understanding and empathetic, yet it's my job to keep the ship moving forward. And if there's not a solid plan and I can't get my head around focus on where the business needs to be going, it's kind of like I can get everybody rowing, but we could be rowing in circles or rowing somewhere where you have no idea where we're going.
Sure.
So I really feel like what's been difficult for me is to make sure we're continuing to stay focused, and even more so reacting in real time about what's happening to us. Mm-hmm. A goal or an objective that we had to complete in 2020, got completely shoved aside because we were focused on keeping a business afloat. We were looking at not losing contracts. How do we hang on to our contracts? So having to change in real time, I think, was a real big piece for us. Yeah,
great perspective. So that real time shifting. Kate, you work with a lot of leaders. Help us understand what you're seeing and kind of the, how this is impacting leaders and what they can do about it.
Yeah, building straight from Mary's kind of examples there. I'm an executive coach, so I work with individuals one-on-one, and I have the luxury of having sort of the curtains pulled back on what it's really like in the mentality of these leaders. And Mary, what you're saying is exactly what I'm saying, and that there are these extra pressures on our leadership groups because leaders are well aware of the impact they have on the culture of their team, on making sure they want to support their team, to be that person to kind of bring everyone in and create that safe space. But at the same time, there's still the need to drive the vision forward of the business, keep an eye on strategic goals, keep our businesses afloat through what has been an economically challenging time. And the risk here is that leaders can deprioritize their own needs. And once that happens, if we're constantly putting our eyes to sort of putting out the fires and not regenerating our own well-being, we run the risk of kind of going down the drain, and as we're using that word, burnout. And then the danger with that is the decisions aren't going to be as good. The ability to maintain that kind of level, steady kind of emotion and positive mood throughout the team isn't going to be so consistent. And so I think it really does, when we're asking what are the risks of leader stress, it really comes down to the fact that if leaders aren't taking care of their own well-being, that is going to permeate through the organization and through the group. And we do need to be aware of leaders, that the impact we have across a group, and that it is essential for us to take care of our own well-being. And building off that, the other thing here is that you sort of mentioned some leaders kind of just want to put their head down and get on with the business. And that sends a very clear message to the group that it's not okay to feel stressed, if you like. And there's a really important concept that is gaining more momentum recently called psychological safety. And sort of we talk as leaders through our body language, our actions, all of these kind of other ways. And I think it's important to step back and say, am I creating a safe and supportive environment for my team? And that matters. And if you're not bought into stress being an issue, the danger is that you're going to alienate your team, you're going to alienate good people, and then you lose talent, right? So I think it's just really important that stress is on the agenda for leaders, their own stress, and also how they're paying attention to it at an organizational level.
So that idea of psychological safety, Rob, as you look at it from a corporate perspective, as you think of programmatically and how leaders create that psychological safety and doing so by managing their own stress, how do we, as an organization, how do we tend to and take care of our leaders, and how do we create that psychological safety so that they can experience what they need to experience, process what they need to process, and come out, and so that they can continue to lead and focus on the organization? What do you think?
Yeah, I think there's room for, and we talked about it a little bit, there is room for different styles of leadership, but I think the bottom line is that there needs to be some sort of demonstration that our leaders care about the people that work for them, and they care about them as people and not just an employee ID on a spreadsheet. And, it sounds trite to say, I care about my people as people, but it really does matter. And there is research to support that. And so I think the bottom line is there needs to be a recognition that, I'm coming through as an authentic person, and I'm demonstrating that I care about my people. The other thing that came to mind was, what we try to do as leaders is, at least from my perspective, is to reduce the amount of uncertainty and ambiguity as much as possible. And we're in a very uncertain and ambiguous environment right now. So what sort of conversations can we be having with our people? And getting back to the business of business, obviously we need to take care of ourselves as leaders. And so lean into the things that help you sustain your own well-being. That's a given. Not always something that people do or make time for, but that's a given. So once we are able to put that oxygen mask on for ourselves, what sort of conversations can we have with our people that allow them to have clearer expectations around the work? And that can be at an individual level, that can be at a team level, and then obviously bring that up to the larger organizational level from a strategic objective perspective. So I think, having, and this is a perfect opportunity to have some of those conversations, because things have changed quite dramatically in a lot of cases. And so what can we take out of this moving forward? This is an opportunity to evolve as an organization for some. And so this is a perfect opportunity to have a conversation about what are the things that we should continue to do, a start, stop, continue sort of conversation. So what should we start doing? What should we stop doing? What should we continue to do? And that can be things that were necessary during the time of COVID and may not be necessary moving forward. But what do we want to learn from this time period, and what do we want to carry forward as an organization?
So you brought up a couple of good points, and all good points, but I'm latching on to this idea of alignment, communications. That is one of the things I think, in my experience, organizations they try to do well with communications and helping people to be aligned and understand what's happening. But I think a few of you brought up earlier this idea that uncertainty, not really knowing, this kind of feeling of lack of control, how you communicate, how you manage and lead through change. This really is a massive change experience that everybody is going through, right? And so all those principles of change management and change leadership can really help you. And so before we move on, I think this is a perfect pivot point to start talking about organizationally. How do we as leaders at a system level deal with this, right? Because this is, right, one-on-one conversations is one thing, but trying to manage this throughout a system which an organization is. How do you do that? Let's get to that next. I'm going to pause though, and I'm going to ask Courtney, have there been any questions that to this point that might be good ones for us to surface at this point in the agenda?
There have been some great questions that the attendees have asked, and I think a couple of them really lead into this next conversation from an organizational standpoint. But I think as we move forward, if we could address managing expectations in the workforce. Jeff asked a question. He said, please address managing expectations. Ideals about support, self-care, and recharge are great, but expectations have actually increased in some cases. How do we advise senior leaders, managers, and employees about managing expectations?
Perfect. Panelists, keep that question in mind as we move on to the organization focus. So, really, I think folks on the line here would appreciate hearing about best practices. We talked about acute issues of stress, right? Things that are happening now, but the long term. And how do we build resiliency in our organizations? You could talk about how organizations are identifying and supporting those who are experiencing more of these dramatic impacts, and what should leaders look out for relative to how they might be causing organizational stress, which I think we've addressed a little bit. So Mary, why don't you kick us off on this? You've done a lot of work with corporations who deal with these issues at a systemic level. What's your perspective on this matter?
I got it. I think about it, what a number of our organizations have done, and obviously it starts at the top. And not only does it start at the top, but if it's a core value and or a goal within the organization of resiliency or working with our staff, it just becomes that much more a piece of the culture. Well, we work with a health plan in Texas, and again, it's an organizational structure that obviously I feel as though hospital systems have really felt the pinch of this in a whole different way than many of us can relate to. But for them, resiliency became what they call a pillar in their organization, and they have built out around this pillar of resiliency everything that they need as an organization to support their employees and to support their patients or their clients. So I feel like it really starts at an organizational level where it becomes part of the foundation of who you are. And whether that's a core value, whether that's one of their goals, for them it's a pillar. I think that's where it has to start, because then it's not another flash in the pan or another great idea leadership had. It's actually saying, we're putting a stake in the sand, and this is really important to us.
I think that's a really good point, because we can say we want to address these things, but as operators of businesses, then you have to think about, all right, well, where are the places in the organization where we have to have messaging, where we have to have reinforcing processes or programmatic elements that have to be in place. Rob, I'm sure you've got a perspective on this, on kind of how you orchestrate this at a system level of being able to, if you're going to address something, you can't just talk about it, right? How do you actually embed that into your organizational processes and systems?
Yeah. Well, and when I think about the employee experience too, and knowing that, we're probably talking with people from very small companies to mid-sized companies, one thing that's really important is how are you onboarding your people? So, what sort of things are available to them as part of their benefits? What sort of services, resources do you make available as an organization? And as a leader, if maybe you're not clear, if you have a benefits person, get with that benefits person. If you are the benefits person, just make sure that you've checked in with your insurance carrier or whomever you use for ancillary benefits, because oftentimes there are things associated with short-term disability, long-term disability, life insurance policies that are little add-ons. There might be an employee assistance program that's associated with that you might not be aware of. So just making sure that people are aware of what's available to them, because a lot of times during the onboarding process, it's just getting to know the company, getting to know the people you're working with, and ultimately learning how to do the job that you're going to do for that organization. a lot of times they'll forget about the other things that come along with being an employee of this particular company. So a reorientation, a flyer, a communication, just a reminder that these things are here and you can avail yourselves of them.
Yeah, and I would imagine that those providers, those insurance providers, et cetera, are going to have really great resources that you haven't really even known about, right? And things that you could do on the fly that they could bring to bear. So having those conversations would be really important. How about this notion that Jeff brought up about managing expectations? What's your thought on that from a kind of an organizational perspective?
Yeah, I mean, it comes back to the people who are in managerial leadership positions.
Okay.
It is a skill. It is something that is important from a ongoing conversation perspective. If you're not having regular conversations with your team, that is a huge opportunity just to step into those conversations. The risk of not having a conversation and having people fill in the blanks. We talk about setting expectations or reducing ambiguity. And communicating, the importance of communications. People will fill in the blanks if you're not communicating with them. And generally, it's not going to be the sort of blanks or the sort of information they're filling in is not going to be the sort of thing that you want them to do. So I think the environment that we're in now, once again, the risk of not doing something is greater than the risk of maybe making a misstep along the way. And if you're coming at it, from a genuine place of authenticity and wanting to do the right thing, I think people will see that even if you maybe don't always say the right thing.
Kate, what do you think about this this kind of organizational perspective?
Oh, I could talk about this all day, Steve. So
We've got a couple of minutes.
Coming at it from that best practice, that kind of honing in on that, I come at this from the sort of research organizational psychology perspective. And I think a lot of organizations are running around right now going, oh, what do we need to do about stress? What do we need to do about stress? And they're not necessarily stepping back to say, what are the unique issues that we're facing within our organization? Instead, they're like grabbing and saying, oh, we need to get an employee assistance program. We need to get, a fruit bowl. And they're not having the strategic view, and they're not starting with data collection. And I think it's really, really important to say that best practice, you should be working out what are the unique issues that you're facing so that you can take a strategic approach to solving those issues. And I work with organizations to do workplace well-being reviews, and I do that in a very detailed manner. You don't necessarily need to go to that level of detail if you're in a smaller organization, but start a conversation. Ask your people, what are they dealing with? What are the stresses? Before you start making assumptions and offering solutions that may not be the right thing. So I think just in terms of best practice, it's really important that we take this strategic view and start with data collection.
I would echo that. Well, as we come to the final stages of our presentation discussion today, I want to come back to what Mary posed at the very beginning of this dialogue. And all of this is happening in the context of really significant things in our society, our economy. And, I guess as you think about the layering effect of this, let's start with Mary, and then I'll let each of you take a moment and reflect on this. How can organizations lead this? I think, the politics of the past couple of years have been really heated. Lots of conflict happening both personally and spilling over into the workplace. The social and the social justice issues that we've been experiencing over the last year, it's really significant, and people are experiencing that very directly in our organization. So I'd like maybe each of you to take a minute and share your thoughts on this as you think about all those other issues that are happening in the context around us as we deal with this pandemic. Go ahead, Mary.
Well, the first thing that comes to me is in managing these expectations, back to that piece of, unless we listen, unless we ask, unless we understand, can we help manage those expectations? And I'll tell you, we internally have gone through some, huge pressures. I mean, we have people that have very different, obviously, as in any organization, very different thoughts about this, and where should you be, and why aren't you standing up, and and leading the charge, and screaming at the top of your lungs, and others are like, oh, let's, kind of the old Minnesota nice, let's just kind of go along. And so I feel like as a company, we've brought together people to really talk about this instead of which I am. If you haven't read the book White Fragility, that's something you might want to consider, but it's really talking about where are we at within this and our unconscious bias, and where do we stand, because that's what the internal issues our staff are dealing with. So they are not, I feel like they're just being layered, stress upon stress upon stress, and these core issues of social justice and equity and inclusion are just really bubbling to the top because they've had it. They're back to our emotions, right? They're raw right now, and they want to see change, and they want to see it now. And for us, there are things we can change pretty fast. We can change the way we word things. We can change how we approach things and the language. But then there's things, as I've said to my team, we have to eat the elephant a bite at a time. We can't conquer the whole thing. This is something that's going to take potentially years for us to get to, but I'm open and willing to have that conversation. Yeah. And I think that's where it starts.
Sure. Conversation, dialogue. I think that's great. Kate, how about you? What's your perspective on this?
I think just, again, building on what Mary said, it comes back to the last point. And unless you can understand what are the unique pressures of the people in your group, then you can't attend to them properly. So being willing to perhaps open up sort of difficult conversations, but do that willingly, is an important part of managing stresses. And I really do think that in many ways our organizations are new communities. We've perhaps not gathering around religious communities and the like in the way that we did in previous generations. And organizations are at the forefront of a lot of this social change. And so it's important for us as organizational leaders to recognize that and continue that conversation.
Great advice. Rob, any final thoughts on this as we get to our Q&A?
Yeah, I would echo everything that's been said already, and just add that the work that organizations choose to do or not do around diversity, equity, and inclusion will have an impact on their growth and retention over time. And if it's not something that's bubbling to the surface for your individual organization at this particular point in time, it eventually will. So it's just a matter of time. And I would just encourage everybody to just, focus on yourself first and do your own learning and dig into it a little bit and see where that takes you.
I think that's a great way to cap this off. Start with ourselves. This is probably a full conversation. I think another topic for another day. And I think I'm going to bring that back to EBITDA Partners and suggest that be a final. We've got just a couple of minutes for questions. Courtney, any that we didn't get answered as we walked through the topics today?
Yeah, I think this was a great question. Just as more companies are looking ahead and looking at making work from home more incorporated into a daily routine, it reduces the cost of real estate for companies, but it also eliminates commute times for employees. How does the working from home, not having that commute, what's the impact that it has on employees emotionally?
So I will jump in and say to Jeff that flexibility is, in the literature, one of the things that really does help with the minimization of stress. So at an individual level, I believe that offering sort of flexibility in how people choose to work gives them a greater sense of control. And I think it is only going to support employees' well-being in the long term. And I think the important point is flexibility. So not necessarily the mandating, but giving employees options, I think, is important to support their well-being.
Any other questions?
Great. You know, there was just one other question. I think it's a spin-off of kind of where we were going from the DEI conversation. Belonging is a major issue for mental and emotional wellness.
Yeah.
Some corporations are forcing programs that many feel are divisive. What's that fine line? What's the answer?
Yeah, Rob, you want to give us a perspective on this? I bet you've dealt with this.
Wow, what's the answer? I mean, I would agree with Kate that a lot of it is going to be based on an individual organization and where they're at on their DEI journey. You know, doing nothing once again is more risky than doing nothing, and I think it's ultimately up to kind of leadership and what they're hearing from their employees about what the next steps ultimately are. And frankly, this is an area where unless you have staff that are able to dig into it, it would probably be best to bring in an expert to help advise you on this.
Yep, I would agree with that. Well, that takes us to the end of our time. Mary, Kate, Rob, you guys were fantastic. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your expertise and your stories. So appreciate it. Courtney, thank you for helping us through this and guiding the group and being a part of this experience. I'll just, as a pitch for Professor Plum, Scott, I got it right this time, Minnesota Sales Institute. He's going to be talking about selling is your reputation in action next month with EBITDA Partners. So with that, I'll bid you all a good day. Thanks for joining us and appreciate your time and attendance, and stay safe out there. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.